Welcome, travelers, to another episode where today I'm going to be talking about everything Marvel did right and wrong in their comic books and movies when it comes to Norse mythology. The very first thing we're going to do is talk about the top 5 things Marvel got right. They really nailed Asgard as a city and Bifrost as the bridge that goes to the city of the gods, which are the Aesir gods. They're the new Viking gods. They don't really touch much about the Vanir gods, but what they do touch in terms of the city of the gods is quite on point. It might be a little bit more sci-fi than your original sources, but it still passes the grade. So speaking of Bifrost, Heimdall is actually hit correctly as well. So Heimdall was the guardian of the Bifrost Bridge, and he had superhuman abilities to detect the presence of intruders. In the Eddas, they mention that he can hear the blades of grass growing to the level of his supernatural detection abilities. So everything about Heimdall is correct. Now, if we talk about Odin, they nail Odin quite well too. He is the Allfather. They get him correctly with the missing eye, and he is the father of Thor, indeed. While there might be some other inaccuracies that we'll be talking about in the next section of the video, in this one, I got to give them points for getting this right. The other thing is about Loki, Loki being an anti-hero. In the comic books, originally, he was painted a lot more in terms of a villain and came very black and white. But I find that over time, over the decades of the Thor comic book and over the span of the movies and even a spin-off series about Loki, is they got his characterization right. He isn't a just straight up villain. He's a very nuanced and complex character, and I'd probably best describe him as an anti-hero. They get his personality quite well in the latest episodes of the Loki series. Now, the other thing that I would like to give them kudos for is the fact that when they painted the picture of Ragnarok, they did not oversee one of the pivotal and central figures of Surt, the fire giant, being front and foremost when it comes to Ragnarok. In the Eddas, he is attributed with the striking down of the sky, sundering the sky and burning Yggdrasil to the ground. So while they might not, they'll deviate from the Eddic Ragnarok, they did get the characterization right for these characters. Now let's move on to what Marvel got wrong. Okay, so the very first thing that I would say that I end up getting pinged about in a lot of my panels that I do on the convention circuit is the relationship between Thor and Loki. And indeed, they are not brothers. So Marvel makes them out to be brothers, blood brothers, having the same lineages, but in fact, what ends up happening is Thor is Odin's son, but when you look at Loki, he has 2 other parents, which is Laufey and Farbauti. And so those started getting mentioned, and that's going to bring me to my next point. Loki is characterized as an ice giant. As a matter of fact, when you end up looking at characterizations and story depictions of Laufey and Farbauti, they do tend to point in the direction that Loki was a fire giant. Even more in terms of evidence when we look at kennings. And kennings are the Viking age poems. First they were an oral tradition, and then they were written down in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. Bylist and Helblindi, his 2 brothers, actually come out on several poems as analogies to heat, fire, and ash. These elements point more towards Loki being a fire giant rather than an ice giant. Then we can talk about Loki's kids. So Hel, Fenrir, and Jormungandr are a little bit misrepresented in the Marvel Universe. All 3 are in fact Loki's children, and they are sired by Loki and a giantess witch named Angrboda. And so these 3 monstrous creatures are in fact his children, rather than, I think, in one of the movies they end up referring to Hel as Thor and Loki's sister. Thor, in the Eddas and in different sagas where he is one of the central characters, is described as a short, red-haired man. And in Marvel Comics, he's a tall, blonde-haired Viking Scandinavian. So it's a little bit different in terms of his appearance. The other thing that is a little bit off in terms of appearance is Mjolnir. Mjolnir, if you end up Googling it, in terms of its renditions in antiquity, looks very, very different than the standardized hammer that you see in Marvel Comics. The other thing is, they talk about Marvel's Thor being able to fly by swinging his hammer around, but in fact, the mythological Thor could only fly if he has in his chariot that was drawn by his goats. The hammer did not make him fly. In fact, the hammer was a misadventure by two dwarves that were trying to forge the greatest relics of all time. But Loki got involved, and he turned himself into a gnat that ended up biting one of the dwarves that was working the bellows. And because he was stinging him repeatedly, the bellows got cool, and so the haft of the hammer became shorter. The hammer can only be lifted if the wearer also has the gauntlets and the belt to go with the hammer. Whereas in the Thor comic books and movies, it can only be carried by someone who is virtuous and has a true heart, which is not entirely the case, because in some of the sagas, Thor's hammer was actually stolen by the Rimjotans, and they were able to carry it off and hold it as hostage for, a longer story that I will save for another video. Thank you for watching, and that is a summary of the top 5 things they did right and the top 5 things they did wrong in the Marvel Universe when it comes to Vikings. Until next time, skål.